Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on if you're watching the Citizens of Platteville. My name is Adam Reekle, and I am the city manager here for the city of Platteville. And what I am doing via Zoom here is recording a virtual session of the 2022 city draft operating budget. Which is presented to the Common Council, but also there is a public hearing that is done for residents and citizens as well to kind of give you an update on everything that the staff and the council has been working on since summer in regards to preparing for the budget. So one thing that we always do in regards to the budget is there is a quote that staff puts together. So our 2022 city budget quote this year is, "Budgeting isn't about limiting yourself, it's about making the things excite you possible." So what we're going to be doing here is, obviously, as you can see, this is the 2022 city budget timeline. And as you can see, we started in October going through the CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan. Then our Airport Commission reviewed the airport side of the budget. Then we had a number of sessions in regards to presenting to the Common Council, where I presented the first draft of the budget. Went to the Water and Sewer Commission. Then there were a couple of other meetings to review overall each individual department. Notices then have been sent out to all the appropriate papers and websites and on social media to let you know when the budget potentially could be adopted. And then obviously tonight is, or on November 15th is when this is being recorded, is the presentation that I'm giving to the public. And then again, there will be a similar presentation done on Tuesday, November 23rd at 7 o'clock. That is the official public hearing for the City of Platteville budget. And then typically after that meeting, we do request or ask the Common Council to adopt a budget so that we can assure we have everything timely into the appropriate county and state agencies to make sure that everything is recorded and the taxes are sent out accordingly. So what we're going to be doing throughout kind of this presentation here is just going over a quick thing about budget basics. Talking a little bit about the financial outlook and considerations of this particular budget, looking at the 2022 city budget initiatives that were trying to be established in this budget, talking about some of the increases and decreases that staff saw in the overall budget areas, going over a little bit what has been proposed for the city's capital improvement plan and also the American Rescue Plan Act funding, or ARPA funding, that we received from the federal government. Doing a quick dive into kind of some budget comparisons between what is being proposed for 2022 and what is currently in the budget for 2021. Then talking about the overall city tax impact, and then finalizing talking about kind of the proposed impact that it would have on the tax. So just to kind of go over some brief basics here. So budget basics, obviously the city must create a budget where revenues equal expenditures. So as you can see from the revenue side, typically the city's revenue consists of borrowings. So that's either long-term or short-term money that we go out for capital projects, which usually is streets, or particularly water and sewer. State aid, so those are particularly revenue money that we receive either from the state for helping us with our operations, as well as we get a municipal aid payment for having a university, also transportation aids and various grants. There are fees that we have, obviously, to utilize services, whether they be for the museum or for copies or for programs. Then also, obviously, we have taxes, which is primarily property taxes that make up the revenues that we use to cover our expenditures, which typically are operating expenses, anything related to our capital spending, so our capital improvement planning, debt payments that we have to make for any borrowing that we do. And then if we would have anything in regards to our tax increment finance districts where they are not supporting themselves, then we have to find a way to cover those gaps or shortfalls. So again, just going over kind of the expenditures, there's the operating budget. This is basically the cost to run the day-to-day operations of the city. So that's the staff, the supplies, the tools necessary we need to run all of our various departments. We have our CIP, which is our capital improvement plan. These are typically one-time costs for large capital items. Some items are predictable, such as streets. Others are not, where if we have a piece of equipment that doesn't work, or particularly some kind of one-off projects that we're working on, that would fall into that. Debt service, obviously, is repayments on our loans, which are used to fund expenses, long-lasting capital projects. So again, typically that is our streets and kind of our water and sewer infrastructure. And then we have our tax increment financing districts, or TID districts. So this is where if revenues are less than expenses, as we talked about, the shortfall may need to be covered by other areas. So again, just talking about the overall city's operating revenue, the kind of rule that we tend to follow is one-time revenues should not be used to balance the operating budget. So there's really two options to balance the city's budget. We either have to increase revenues or we have to decrease expenses. So the personal equivalent you can kind of think of is your monthly pay must cover your ongoing personal expenses, utilities, food, clothing, etc. So using one-time revenues to balance your budget is like winning $500 in the lottery and then leasing a car with a monthly payment of $500. You can cover the expense for 1 month, but you will not be able to cover the expense next month unless you win the lottery again. So that's why definitely we try not to use one-time revenue sources to cover operating revenue. So debt service, again, this is the city borrows money to pay for large, long life capital projects such as streets. The length of a loan should not extend beyond the useful life of the items for which the funds were borrowed. So again, whatever you're borrowing, you want to make sure that your debt payments, if it's a 20-year loan, you don't want that asset or whatever you're doing to have to be paid again before 20 years is up. So payments on loan represents this debt service. So there are some caps in regards to the amount the city can borrow. So the state has a 5% of equalized value policy that we have to follow, but the city also created its own policy where we have a 3.5% cap of equalized value. So, and I can explain that a little further here. So again, the personal equivalent, when you take out a mortgage or a car loan, you make monthly payments until the debt is paid off. So the city borrowing notes, as you can see here, our 2021 equalized value was $761,224,200. So the state borrowing limit is 5% of that number, which comes to about $38 million. So as you can see, and we had principal outstanding in 2021 for the city of Platteville of about $20,492,022. So that represents 53.8%. So what that means is we still have a lot of capacity in the event we would have a major issue that would have to be funded by debt. Again, you never want to get to that total amount. So it definitely is good that we do have that capacity, but we do try to be financially responsible in ensuring that we don't increase that number too much. Again, and that's kind of where this is the next step. The city then has created its own debt limit policy where we will not go over 3.5% of our equalized value. So the city policy limit again is $761,224,200. When you take that times 3.5%, that comes to $26,642,847. With our principal outstanding, right now we're at 76.9% of that 3.5. So again, we definitely still do have, about $5 to $6 million of capacity to cover, unexpected projects or things that, potentially would need to be fixed. So CIP funding, again, there's a couple of different funding sources when it comes to capital improvement planning. There's transfers from the general fund extra reserves. So any surplus that we have by either grant funding or particularly if our revenues were more than our expenditures goes into our reserves. So that potentially can be utilized to cover certain projects. There's always carryover from the previous year. So if we have budgeted for a project and hopefully it comes in under, we're able to carry that over. Or if for whatever reason, due to timing or unexpected circumstances, we weren't able to complete a project, that tends to have to be carried over to the next year. There's short-term borrowings. This is not typically a sign of financial stress. So again, this is something that we do to try to get money ahead of time. And then we look at down the road, trying to refinance that. So there obviously is base reserves that may impact bond ratings. So we do have to maintain certain things in our savings accounts in order to keep those reserves. And then long-term borrowing is typically what is done in our CIP, and that's used for streets and some buildings. So due to budgetary concerns, the city has available about $696,635 to spend on predictable CIP items. These items include vehicle replacements, equipment replacements, building repairs, park improvements, and sidewalk repairs. In addition to that total, the city has borrowed from about $1 to $2 million for street reconstruction annually. Under the current long-range financial plan, the city has limited this borrowing to the amount being retired each year in debt. So in 2019, the anticipated principal paid off for levy-supported financial borrowing is $1,275,000. So that is typically what then we have proposed in the budget to be used to cover street projects. So then again, we have our TIF districts. So kind of the way to think about TIF districts is they're separate funds that have their own revenue and expenditures. So if the revenue exceeds the expenses, the amount goes into the fund balance for the TIF district for future projects. The TIF district may close early and the created tax base is added to the rest of the city. Unfortunately, though, if expenses exceed revenues and there isn't fund balance or any type of savings to cover that, then the general fund must cover the shortfall as we talked about before. So again, the personal equivalent for this is imagine that you own several small businesses. If the revenue exceeds expenses, you can reinvest that money into those businesses. Down the road, you will see the business make a profit. If the business can't pay their expenses though, then you as the owner must pay from your personal account to cover any shortfalls. So some of the things we looked at, particularly in the 2022 city budget, was that using projections for operational needs, we're anticipating borrowing and CIP spending. The long-range financial plan provided a look at the financial factors influencing the next 5 years. One of the things, unfortunately, that we continue to see is that our increases in operational expenses are expected to outpace net new construction. And net new construction is what is our ability as a city to increase our levy amount before we would have to go to referendum or look at other means. It is again anticipated that TID 6 will not require levy support due to projected growth this year, but due to some future upcoming years, we may have to revisit that and look at some different ways to cover any kind of potential shortfalls that we may see. So as we discussed, net new construction this year for the city was 0.43%. So that equated to about $3,142,500 in growth. Now, unfortunately, if you look at our peers are definitely increasing much further. So the town of Platteville was 1.51%. Lancaster was pretty much right on par with us. Belmont was 1.73%. And then some of our other kind of municipalities that have universities, you can see Whitewater was 2.35, 1.14 was River Falls, and Baraboo was 0.68. So definitely, the more our net new construction goes up, that gives us the ability, obviously, to grow, which then can potentially cause a reduction in our taxes. But when it continues to be somewhat stagnant or flat, that does make budgeting for the city, it can be difficult. There are things that we have to consider, things that we can't fund, projects that have to get pushed off. So that is something that we continue to deal with. And it's not just us, in every column on, there's plenty of municipalities that are having that same issue with growth. So that is something that as a city, we need to look at from both a residential and commercial standpoint, is how we can continue to add to our city and add to our tax base to help, decrease that burden then as all of us as taxpayers see on our tax bills. So again, we're looking at spending about $696,635 of annual levy support for CIP projects, and we're going to have to require to use some of our reserves to cover some of that. The TIDs and citywide growth, as I talked about, and our increases in state funding would also help in the above. So another thing that we have to look for down the road in a couple of years is city funding support for a new fire facility that we've been talking about will need to be monitored due to debt service requirements. So when we look at an overall budget, some of the things that particularly are drivers that can cause increases or decreases, particularly in the operating expenses, are obviously salaries, benefits, any mandates that the city now has to follow, elections. Sometimes we have off years where there's no elections. Some years we have governor elections. We have city elections. So those are all things that can either increase the budget or decrease it. Contracts as well. So things that are seen in inflation increases in prices or not being able to find vendors can cause that, or if we have more, can cause us to go down. From a revenue side, obviously more increased state aid we get is the less than that we have to kind of levy on our own. So that certainly helps. But then obviously if those numbers are decreased, then that burden falls back onto us. Hotel tax is another one. So obviously the more people we have staying in our hotels is the more funding that is received not only to the city, but then to the Chamber of Commerce and other tourism organizations. And then obviously revenue related to new development. So anytime we get new growth, whether it be a new house or a new business or new construction, that obviously increases the revenue opportunities for the city, which then in turn can decrease the tax rate that we have. Other things are debt service. So if we have payments that were kind of deferred to some years, it may go up, it may go down. Same thing with TID support and expenditure restraint. So some of the things that were really put into this budget was a overall proposed 1% wage increase for all non-union city staff members. So this had a potential impact to the budget of approximately $19,903. One of the things obviously that the city looked at this year was really trying to invest in the current employees that we have and also make sure that we are continuing to analyze that we are competitive in the market when we're trying to recruit for positions for the city. And this is something obviously that I'm sure everybody has heard has been a struggle all over. You are seeing very much in the private sector that they are raising the hourly rates in order to try to attract people to work. And that now has definitely spilled over to the city. So we're seeing that in regards to recruitment and in regards to, it is challenging to try to get new employees. because there is a lot more competition in regards to pay and in regards to benefits, in regards to everything. So as a city, in order to ensure that we are continuing to provide the utmost quality of services to our residents, visitors, and guests, that we need to continue to be competitive. So those are some of the things that, looking down the road, we have put into proposals this year to try to increase our wage staffs so that we can, and rates, so that we can continue to be competitive. So what you can see here as well is a proposed Wisconsin Professional Police Association wage increase of 4% to again align with compensation plans. By increasing the wage structure, this will assist us to remain competitive with other municipalities and also just to be competitive in the market. There potentially is an impact to the budget of approximately $27,900. Proposed step increases for all eligible employees in recognition of honoring the 2016 City of Platteville Compensation Plan. So in 2016, the city did a very comprehensive review of all of our staff's positions in regards to wage rates, where they should be starting, potentially, as they continue to work for the city, what could be potential wage increases that they would see. And what was determined out of that study is, obviously at that point, we were definitely falling behind in regards to our peer municipalities, but then also the private sector as well. Unfortunately, due to kind of budgetary restraints and issues that we have not been able to kind of fully honor that compensation plan. So this is something that, again, in trying to continue to be competitive in recruiting, retention, and employee engagement, this is something that we are looking to propose a step increase for all eligible employees in trying to get more in line with what that plan was showing that we need to do as a city in order to continue to offer the services that we need to provide to our residents and have quality employees doing that. So again, as you're seeing kind of a theme, we looked at a lot of different areas that needed to be potentially adjusted in order to recruit staff. So we're looking to increase to recreational seasonal staff wages to assist with staffing issues and to maintain competitive wages with other municipalities. This had about a $10,500 impact to the budget. We looked at adding dispatch shift differential pay of 50 cents per designated night hours to maintain, again, competitive wages with other municipalities. And then looking at overall increasing some of our fees to help cover kind of revenues and expenses. So we looked at the pool. Currently, the cost for a daily pass is $3, which is forecasted to bring in about $25,000 in revenue every year. So roughly, if you would equate this out, this would be 8,333 individuals who would go to our pool every year. An increase to $4 has been proposed by the Park Recreation and Forestry Committee, which will be considered by the Common Council in December when they look at all of the fee schedule reviews for potential increases or decreases, depending on what's going on. So obviously, with all of these changes, I continue to review with city staff and our employees about needs. And with any budget, there is obviously a limit of where we can do things with how much money that we have. So I continue to hear from all of our staff in our city that additional positions would be helpful in certain areas or particular projects. But what you can see here is kind of going through, and when we had to use sharpen our pencils and look at ways where we could either cut costs or have to defer, there were some things that were not included in this budget that were determined by the council and myself, and as well as staff. So as you can see here, there is a addition to the police department for a front desk assistant. That was something that, unfortunately, just kind of due to where everything was falling this year, that was not proposed to move forward. But that does not mean that need is not there. So that is something that certainly we will be reviewing in future years to see how we could incorporate that into our plans. Same thing again with our museum staff. Our museum is doing an amazing job with the pool of staff that they have, but definitely there has been an ask that there could be additional support that could be utilized there. So that's something, again, that in future budgets, we're going to continue to kind of look at and analyze to ensure that we're continuing to operate that museum, at full throttle. The other thing, obviously, we looked at was the addition of an agenda creation software. That was something that, unfortunately, just due to kind of where everything was falling, we felt that was not something that could be included in this budget. But we certainly will be looking at that to kind of, again, ensure that we have the best communication options for our residents and visitors who want to know what is going on in the city and want to kind of keep up with all the different commissions and committees that we have. So what we kind of then looked at is obviously some of the areas where we definitely saw increases of greater than $10,000 in this budget compared to previously last year. And one, obviously, that we had was health insurance. Overall, we have been very fortunate the last couple of years that our health insurance provider has really kind of tightened their belt and is not either raised, or actually we saw a decrease in some of our health insurance. Unfortunately, this year that now we kind of have to pay the piper, for lack of a better word. They have the need to increase those rates, and there is a contract that we have that they can only do that by a certain percentage. But then we also did have changes with obviously employees either growing their families or changing, where we saw some impacts there. So that certainly definitely was something that we had to review in this budget. There are other areas as well as, OE Gray taking on that building, but that is supposed to be offset by the revenue coming in. So that was kind of a budget neutral move. Again, room tax is another one where we're anticipating now that we're going to have more people staying in our hotels, hopefully, that we'll see kind of an increase there, but that's offset by the revenue. Our salt contract, unfortunately, is one of those things that we continue to see increasing every year. So we have started to look at potential alternative means that we can do to try to decrease that cost. And then, as we talked about, a lot of the other increases in here are trying to really stick with the staff that we have and continue to be competitive in their wages, and continue to try to have a competitive wage where, if we do need to fill positions, that we can get a quality pool of candidates that can supply those necessary and important services to our residents. Obviously, as we talked about, there is a gubernatorial election next year. So that definitely has an impact on our budget, where normally we don't see those kind of expenses in other years. And then just some, basic stuff in regards to operating expense. Our liability insurance obviously is going up, which happens every year and kind of is reviewed. And then there were some restructuring, again, as we talked about, in regards to our library staff, but that again was a budget neutral move, and as well as our pool seasonal wage increases that we talked about. So then, obviously, we did have some decreases when we go through the budget. So with everything going on, our finance department did decrease their outlay, which is kind of their project fund account, by $17,500. Again, we have our senior center rent expense that is now going to transition to OE Gray. So that expense is being moved to a different area. And then our street lighting, by going to LED lights, we continue to see a reduction in those costs every year. So that is definitely rewarding that those projects, we're definitely seeing the benefit of switching to those LED lights. With that as well, we also tried to look at some other revenue areas we can increase. So again, we have the OE Gray revenue coming in. We do have the transfer from our capital improvement planning fund for leased vehicles. So that was kind of a wash there. We have our room tax increases that are coming in, our fire revenue, and we're doing some of our contracts with our municipal partners. We're looking at some increased revenue opportunities there. Our museum continues to do an amazing job at getting grants. We did see an increase in our municipal service payment for the first time in a while, so that was definitely helpful. And then we do anticipate some of our parking violations and court penalties increasing from a revenue standpoint, just because of the fact that more things we anticipate and hope that they will continue to be trending in the right direction with COVID and will be open. So we anticipate there is the potential for that. Some other unfortunate decreases that we saw, a big one was interest, and this obviously had a pretty significant impact in the budget this year. Unfortunately, due to kind of COVID-19 and everything going on, we have seen some record lows in interest, which is great if you're borrowing, not so good if you are just trying to use your normal savings account. So unfortunately, in prior years, we saw, almost with all of our accounts and all of our funds that we have in various banks and areas, we normally would see sometime we're between, it can be anywhere, fluctuate from $100,000 to $125,000 a year that we would get in interest. So we're looking at about a $55,000 reduction, unfortunately, just with those rates. Hopefully, as that, COVID-19 continues to improve, that we'll start to see that go back up. And unfortunately, transportation aid has decreased again. That is kind of a byproduct of kind of our financial situation. And this is not just us, this is every municipality. We're kind of having to pick what roads you can do, what roads you can't with the funds that you have. The less construction work that you do, the less the formula provides aids over the course of a number of years. So that is something that we will continue to kind of analyze and hope that we can start to get those numbers up and get increased amount of transportation aid. So just wanted to quickly go over kind of the capital improvement plan. So what you can see here is kind of all of the different departments. So we have general government, the police department, DPW. We have our parks, our museum, fire, taxi, and airport. And these are all the various projects they were looking to do in 2022 and their costs. So as you can see, we have about $2.8 million worth of requested costs in regards to various departments. And so what we did as a city staff and as well as the council is looked at all of the different kind of financing sources that we can use, which is the capital project tax levy, intergovernmental revenues, our general fund transfers, any other sources of funding, whether that be grants or support, and then if we have to go and borrow, particularly for a project. And as you can see, typically those are our street projects. We also have a couple of items that specifically are being funded by levy. And then we have grant funding, which typically, as you can kind of see here, is our ARPA funding, or any CIP carryover is what's intergovernmental revenues or any grants. Our general fund transfers, again, is the money that we utilize from other sources in our reserves to cover the balance. And then other sources, again, would be grants, trust funds that we use, anything from the sale of equipment that can be utilized to cover those. So then obviously with that, just like in our budget, with our CIP, there are some anticipated costs that we are just not able to fund in full. So we had to make some tough decisions as a city and as well as the council. And this was kind of the recommendations that came out or were proposed, was that, we had about 1.1 million in some other projects in regards to street repairs, some renovation plans for City Hall, some equipment, specifically some upgrades to the museum. So what you can see is some of that was funded by capital project levy. Again, some of it was funded by ARPA funding, other sources of funding, which is our wheel tax that we have, potentially utilizing general obligation bonds. But as you can see, due to wanting to stick to our debt limit policy, we are not funding one of those projects in full. So we are going to look at trying to make sure we can get as much of that done for Hickory Street. We believe we can. But then also there were a couple of projects that were recommended to be pushed back potentially to 2023 and reconsidered just due to wanting to ensure that we are being fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars and with borrowing and everything else. And so some of the projects were reduced and we'll look for future years to try to be able to finish those or try to get more creative or grants. So we'll continue to kind of look at that. So then obviously we have our water and sewer budget as well. So that has a capital improvement side to it. So as you can see here is the proposal of about $4 million worth of water and sewer projects that we're looking to do and the various ways that those would be funded through intergovernmental revenues, other sources, and water revenue bond and sewer revenue bonds. Then, just like above, unfortunately, making sure that we're being fiscally responsible, there are some projects that were recommended not to occur and be delayed. So that is something where we will be looking at trying to see if we can get that project within the 2023 financial outlook or find ways to fund that particular project by another source of revenue. So this just kind of shows you a breakdown of the American Rescue Plan Act funding that the city received. The city received about $1.2 million in revenue. Specifically from the ARPA funds for the federal government. And during the course of the summer, the Common Council held a couple of work sessions to kind of go through potentially what could be funded by those sources. And this is kind of what they came up with. So there was potentially some ARPA funding for City Hall renovations to be done, specifically on the technology side. Again, some IT upgrades that need to occur with that, looking at improving our camera system. So particularly we have cameras located right now in certain parts of the city and looking at expanding that to various other places and even within the municipal buildings as well. Then looking at a couple of projects in regards to culverts, stabilization, sidewalks, some wastewater treatment plant upgrades that need to be done, and then our museum. And then there was also some funding sources that were done, particularly for our housing authority, and a possible grant for them to utilize for potential tenants, as well as some stormwater pond projects that the city needs to look at, potentially providing some funding for a housing developer to increase housing within the city, looking at doing an HVAC study for all of our municipal buildings to see what improvements need to be done there. And then again, continuing to try to incentivize broadband providers to be located in the city of Platteville. So what this just kind of goes to now is a quick comparison between 2021 and 2022. So what you can see here is a kind of pie chart that shows the 2021 total governmental expenses. You can see 31% is the general fund, which primarily is staff, employees. as well as we have our debt service, and then particularly all of our capital projects between the water and sewer and our general, as well as some of our other funds, the airport, the Brodsky Center. So if you look primarily from 2021 to 2022, there is not a lot of change. This budget really is just trying to maintain everything that we have been doing, and it's not really looking to increase anything. So you can see the general fund is going from 31% to 33%, and primarily the rest of these, you can see we are seeing a reduction in our capital fund, just again, because that's kind of the trend that we're seeing with projects is we're either having to delay some of those or look at trying to find other ways from an expense or revenue standpoint to fund those. Debt service pretty much stayed the same at 6%. And then relatively all of these are within the ballpark of where they were last year as well. So again, just looking at our revenues, so how are we funding a lot of our expenditures? You can see the two biggest areas, again, tend to be property taxes and intergovernmental revenues that we receive from the state. So we are still very dependent on either property taxes or grants and other means of funding from the state in order to cover our day-to-day operations. But then we do have some other areas with assessments, permits, and fines, other taxes, and public charges for services. So as you can see from 2021 to 2022, when we have a reduction in what we're seeing in intergovernmental revenues and charges, that causes us, unfortunately, to have to increase the property taxes in order to cover those shortfalls to continue to run the day-to-day operations of the city. Again, all the other areas stayed primarily the same as they were the year before. So what we have here is kind of looking now at the overall city tax impact. So as you can see, this is the assessed tax rate comparison from 2026 to 2021. And what we have pulled is a couple of our municipal peers that either have, University of Wisconsin colleges in them or are about the similar population size to Platteville. And what you can see is from 2016 to 2017, this is the assessed rate that has been on your taxes. So that dollar amount is applied to every $1,000 worth of assessed value that you have in your home. So what you can see is over the last kind of 5 years here, we continue to kind of be pretty much in the middle. We are not the lowest municipality in regards to assessed rate, and we definitely are not the highest. So this graph just kind of shows you again another way to see that representation. So obviously here is Platteville, and as you can see, we are not the highest, we're not the lowest, and we're pretty much in between. And again, just kind of showing you the trend over the last couple of years. We are the yellow here. We are pretty much right in the middle of those kind of municipalities. So overall, just kind of looking at what has been proposed in the 2022 budget that will go to the council for potential final approval, is we have a levy increase of about 6%. Our taxi bus fund has seen about 100% increase because last year we did not have to levy for anything due to a lot of the federal grants we were receiving for COVID assistance. Our debt service fund is looking to increase about 4.4%. And our capital improvement fund is looking at actually reducing from where it was in previous years, again, just to try to maintain all of our financial fiscal policies and again, be fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars. So overall, we're looking at about a 2.7% increase in the levy. So what does that mean potentially to the tax bill? In 2021, we had a mill rate of $8.02 per $1,000 of assessed value. So in 2022, we are proposing an increase to $8.27. So that's an increase of 25 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. So in comparison, an owner of a $150,000 home would pay $1,241 in city property taxes, which would be up about $38 from the previous year. That equates to about $3.17 per month. So one of the things obviously we wanted to highlight is historically, where has the city tax rate been? So as you can see in 2022, we are proposing $8.27. That is a little bit higher than it has been in years past. And as you can see, there has been a trend. It's been going up and then it's been going down. And then again, we've slowly started to see an increase again. But overall, historically, we definitely are not near some of the historic highs that the city has seen in years past. And that is something that, the council and obviously city staff, we continue to monitor and try to find ways to ensure that we try to keep the tax rate as low as possible for our residents, while also continuing to provide the services that all of our residents have come to expect with police, fire, public works, the library, the museum, our park and rec services. So those are all things that we take into consideration. So one of the things also that we look at is kind of an overall average of the last 5 years. So as you can see, looking at 2018, we were at $8.13. In 2019, we actually had a reduction to $7.73. So as you can see across the board, depending on if you had a $150,000 home to 200,000, 250, 300, and 350, every taxpayer actually saw a reduction in their taxes on that year. And then slowly going into 2020, 2021, and 2022, there have been some increases. So overall, if you look at historically the last 5 years, a homeowner has seen a $21 increase in 5 years on their taxes for a $150,000 home, and about a $50,000 increase over 5 years for a home that's valued at $350,000. So again, those services are definitely, what goes to fund those is police, fire, EMS, street department work, public works, water and sewer, our library, our parks department, our museum, all of our administrative staff, and the services that a lot of residents have come to expect. So again, we continue to look at, ways to try to minimize and keep that tax rate as low as possible while continuing to provide those services. And when it gets to a point where we feel, that level is no longer acceptable, that's where we have to decide what needs to be either cut or delayed, as you saw in this budget. And that is something that our staff and obviously our council take very seriously and is very important. And I want to give them a lot of credit for the work that not only our staff and the council does in kind of reviewing the budget and trying to get all of the puzzle pieces together to ensure that we're keeping the rate as low as possible while also maintaining the services that everyone has come to expect. So what we have now is our next meeting actually is going to be a public hearing on Tuesday, November 23rd, 2021 at 7 p.m. in the Common Council chambers, where this presentation, a very similar presentation, will be given. And then that will be an opportunity for our council to kind of review information and go from there. So again, I thank you for anybody that took the opportunity to listen to kind of this presentation. And if you have any questions, by all means, please reach out to me at my email, citymanager@platteville.org. Or you can contact me as well at my phone number at 608-348-1821. Obviously, you can also reach out to any council member as well with any questions that you have, and we will do our best to try to get you those answers. So appreciate your time in reviewing this, and I hope you all have a great morning, afternoon, or evening. Thank you. Bye.